The gavel didn't just strike wood, it landed like a verdict already written. Take it off, 3 words, 20 years of service, gone in an instant, like it meant nothing to him. I stood there in my dress uniform, metal catching the courtroom lights, and felt every stare in that room settle on my chest like an accusation. Across the aisle, Renata was smiling. She thought she'd already won. She had no idea what was waiting inside my briefcase, and neither did the man in the black robe who was about to wreck his own career without even realizing it. My name is Cassidy Hale. I've worn this uniform for 18 years. I've bled for it. I've buried friends who wore the same one, and on a gray Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, I found myself on trial, not for anything I'd done, but because a woman I once called family decided my honor had a price tag. Let me back up because this didn't happen overnight. Nothing like this ever does. I enlisted at 22, right out of college. My father used to joke I had more stubbornness than sense. He wasn't wrong. 20 decades of service followed, most of it overseas, on missions I still can't talk about at dinner. I was wounded badly enough once that it took 4 months to walk again without wincing, and during a joint operation I still think about at 3 in the morning, I earned a commendation soldiers don't talk about. You carry it quietly because the people who understand what it cost never need an explanation, and the people who don't never will. I didn't wear it to family dinners, didn't mention it at church picnics. When neighbors asked what I did, I said I'm in the army and left it there. My mother used to tell people her daughter was a hero and I'd change the subject so fast you'd think she'd insulted me. That's just who I am, quiet, steady. I don't need applause to know something was real. My sister-in-law, Renata, was cut from different cloth. She married my brother Marcus 12 years ago, and from the first holiday dinner, I could feel her sizing up our family like she was doing inventory. The china cabinet, my mother's ring, the deed to the old house, like she was pricing it all in her head. When our parents passed, Dad first, his heart giving out slowly, Mom 18 months later from a grief she never meant to survive, they left the family house to Marcus and me equally. Nothing extravagant, white clapboard, a wraparound porch, an oak tree in the backyard Dad planted the year I was born. It wasn't about money, it was the last piece of them we had. Renata didn't see it that way. She saw a listing price. She pushed Marcus to sell, for the kids' college fund, for the business, for anything except letting it sit there holding memories. He resisted for a while, but Renata doesn't yell. She just repeats herself softer and softer until you give in just to stop the noise. I refused. Months passed, calls got shorter, holidays got tense. Then one spring afternoon, a man in a windbreaker showed up at my door with legal papers. Renata was suing me, misappropriation of shared property on paper. In plain terms, force the sale or fight her in court. I chose to fight, so there I was weeks later walking into that courtroom still in uniform, not for show but because I'd come from a veterans memorial that morning. I sat at the defendant's table, straightened my jacket, and caught Renata whispering to her lawyer, smile stretched too wide. I had no idea how strange this day was about to get. Judge Corwin banged his gavel, glanced at me, and something in his face sharpened, offended almost. He leaned forward. This is not a place to show off war trophies. I kept my voice level. I'm sorry, Your Honor, this uniform isn't a costume. I came from a memorial service this morning. He didn't look up. Take off the medal. The room went silent in that specific way a room goes silent when everyone realizes they're watching something they shouldn't be. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought their position gave them the final say, stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, because what happens next is exactly why I'm telling this story. Subscribe if you want more of these. I didn't argue. I reached down, opened my briefcase, and set a folder on the table with a click that seemed to echo. Renata's smile faltered. I stepped forward and handed the folder up myself instead of routing it through the clerk. I wanted him to hold it, to touch it. Judge Corwin flipped it open with the tired disinterest of a man who'd seen 10,000 exhibits and expected the 10,001st to be just as forgettable. The first page was the official citation for my commendation, signed by officers whose names carried weight far beyond that room. His hand, resting on the bench, went still. The second page was a federal verification record, the kind that exists because enough people lie about their service that the government keeps a system just to shut those lies down. Mine had a case number, a stamp, a chain of signatures years deep. The third page was a legal memorandum most civilians never see, spelling out in plain language the protections around wearing duly awarded decorations during official proceedings, not a courtesy, policy. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Your Honor, I'd ask you read the final page." He turned it. I already knew what it said. I'd drafted the accompanying letter myself weeks earlier, the moment I suspected this case wouldn't stay a simple property dispute. The flush crawled up from his collar, not embarrassment, but the look of a man realizing he'd made a mistake in front of witnesses, a court reporter, and a room that would remember exactly what he'd said. "Where did you get this?" he asked, and for the first time his voice carried no command at all. "I've had counsel for some time, Your Honor," I said simply. "I anticipated this might get complicated." My attorney, Callahan, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, given the sensitivity here, I'd like the court's remarks preserved verbatim in the record." "That's already standard procedure," Corwin snapped. "Just wanted it stated plainly," Callahan said. "Your Honor, I have one more witness to call." The doors opened with a heavy, deliberate sound. Colonel Sanders walked down the center aisle in a suit instead of a uniform, but it didn't matter. The whole room could tell this was a man who'd spent his life giving orders and having them followed. He confirmed everything: the operation, the decision I'd made under fire, the lives it saved. Then he added something I hadn't planned for. "I should mention, I spent years training judicial personnel on protocol, including proper courtroom conduct around uniforms and decorations. It's required continuing education in most jurisdictions." He turned to face the bench directly. "You should know this. It's not obscure. It's basic material." Corwin's face cycled through several shades of red. Renata's attorney shot up. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess." Denied. Too fast, too sharp. A man trying to grab back control he'd already lost. I reached into my jacket and set my phone on the table, screen up. "Your Honor, there's something else the court needs to see." The screen lit up, a time-stamped confirmation showing a formal complaint filed minutes before the hearing began. Not a trap. I'd only sensed, from the tone of the filings, that this case had been built for theater rather than truth. The recipients sat there in plain black text: the Judicial Oversight Committee, the State Ethics Investigator, the Regional Veterans Affairs Office, already in motion. Renata had stopped whispering to her lawyer entirely. Her hands laid flat on the table, eyes flicking between the screen and the judge, as if only now understanding this morning had never really been about her lawsuit at all. Her eyes welled, though she fought it. I felt something for her then, not sympathy, more a distant recognition that greed rarely starts as greed. It starts as fear or resentment and curdles from there. Corwin set his gavel down slowly, like something fragile. "The court will take a recess." He stood and left through the side door. The room stayed frozen long after, as if everyone needed permission to breathe again. 3 months passed before the Judicial Oversight Committee released its findings. Life kept moving. I went back to work. I stood at attention at a fellow veteran's funeral and thought about how honor gets tested in places you'd never expect. When the letter came, it was plain and understated, the kind of document that carries enormous weight despite looking unremarkable. Judge Corwin had been formally disciplined and removed from the bench. Not for one careless remark about a medal. the result of a broader review into years of conduct. My case had simply been the thread that unraveled the rest. Renata's lawsuit collapsed soon after. The reviewing judge called it meritless, built on resentment and a payout that was never hers to claim. The court ordered her to cover my legal costs. The ruling used the phrase, "pursued in bad faith." Marcus came to see me on a Sunday, sitting across my kitchen table with a mug of coffee he never touched. He apologized, not just for the lawsuit, but for years of looking away while Renata's resentment simmered. I told him what the Army taught me. You can't always stop someone from making a mistake, but you decide how you respond once the dust settles. He nodded. For the first time in a long while, I had my brother back. Renata left, not just the marriage, but the family entirely, drifting out of holidays, out of the slow work of repair. I don't know where she is now. I hope she's found something better to build a life around than resentment. Bitterness is heavy, and I've never wished that weight on anyone. There was no celebration. The day the findings came through, I drove out to the old house instead. I walked the rooms slowly, ran my hand along the banister I used to slide down as a kid, and stood a long while under the oak tree my father planted the year I was born, tall enough now to shade half the yard. I took my medal out of the small wooden box where I kept it. Not from shame, I never needed to see it daily to know what it meant. I held it in my palm and thought about the young woman who'd earned it and the woman I'd become since, and how the same medal that nearly cost me everything in a courtroom had ultimately been the thing that saved me. Honor was never about being recognized. It's about not betraying it, even when no one's watching, even when the person questioning you sits above you in a black robe, certain that gives them the final word. It doesn't. It never has. That evening, I stepped onto the front porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, my father's old flag still moving gently on its post. Power only survives when it walks hand in hand with responsibility. The day that judge ordered me to take off my medal, he believed he was putting me on trial. In the end, it was his own career standing before the bench. If this story hit home, tell me where you're watching from, drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories about people who stood their ground when it mattered most, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.